Prior to last season, the last time the Clemson Tigers won the ACC was back in 1991, 21 years ago. And back then, neither Virginia Tech nor Florida State was in the ACC. Last season, though, was a good year for the Tigers, for Dabo Swinney's squad, as the Tigers won the Atlantic Division and beat Virginia Tech in the ACC title game, went to a BCS bowl game against West Virginia in the Orange Bowl, and then that's when the magic ended, as West Virginia not only won, but scored 70 points on Clemson. That's right, 70. That's probably going to send a lot of bad vibes around Death Valley. Well, so bad that Kevin Steele, their defensive coordinator, was fired, and now Brent Venables, that's right, OU fans know who he is, now takes over as defensive coordinator with his $800,000 a year salary to try to turn Clemson's defense around. Now, we'll talk about the defense in a second, but for Clemson offensively, there are enough weapons to have another high-win season, including the quarterback Taj Boyd. He returns, along with the running back Andre Ellington, and the receiving corps. They're going to have experience too. Sammy Watkins, probably the best of the receivers, but he'll be complemented also by Jared Brown and DeAndre Hopkins. So the offense has enough playmakers, but where Clemson's going to be hurt a little bit is inexperience up front. The center does come back in Dalton Freeman, who could be all ACC, but you've got some work to do on other parts of that interior. If you're looking at the defense for Clemson, again, Venables runs the show now on the defensive side. And just like the offensive line, the defensive line has some areas to shore up as well. The safeties should be strong with Jonathan Meeks as well as Rashard Hall returning. But overall, defensively for Clemson, we're going to see how they do against the run. That's going to be the big emphasis. If they can improve their rush defense, then this team should be right there in the thick of things as far as trying to get back to the ACC championship game. The schedule for Clemson, early on, they get a nice test against Auburn, the rubber match of that series in which the last 2 years the home team has won the game. Clemson won last year. This year's game in a neutral site in Atlanta. You play Florida State early in Tallahassee in late September. In my opinion, the winner of that game wins the Atlantic. And then other games in the season will include, of course, an October stretch in which they go Georgia Tech and Virginia Tech back-to-back, but there's a bye week in between, and both games are at home, which will help. And then out-of-league play at the end of the year, you host South Carolina. In fact, Clemson's last 3 games of the year are at home. So the schedule actually doesn't work too badly, other than the fact that you have to play at Florida State early on, which I see as a win for the Seminoles. I think Clemson will probably be somewhere in that 9-3, 10-2 department. If they can get to 10 wins, possibly they can earn a BCS at large. But I think they'll at worst finish second in the Atlantic. North Carolina State, unless you live in ACC country, which I don't, many people don't know just how good NC State's been over the last few years. They've been a bowl team. They definitely were last year, and they've got quite a few ingredients coming back this season, including Mike Glennon, the quarterback, along with most of their offensive line and running back James Washington. The emphasis for North Carolina State is going to be pass protection. Last year, not too good in this department. They gave up 38 sacks in 2011. And they have to get off to better starts, too. As far as first quarter scoring last year, NC State only averaged 4 points per first quarter in all of their regular season games. You get off to a better start, that should spell more victories, and that definitely should spell for better statistics on that offensive side. Now, defensively, they're going to be fairly new as far as the front 7 goes. And this is an area where North Carolina State might have to win some shootouts because they're going to be a little inexperienced as far as the line and the linebackers go. But the corner, he is one of the best in college football, in David Emerson. Emerson had 13 picks in 2011, an All-American, and he comes back for the Wolfpack this season. No Virginia Tech on the schedule. That's good news. The not-so-good news for NC State is the fact that they have to play both at Clemson and at Miami, which will be difficult chores indeed. Opening the season against Tennessee, although Tennessee's not great, they are a big-name program. So if you can beat Tennessee in the Chick-fil-A Classic August 31st at Atlanta, then you can set a pretty nice tone to start the season. I look for NC State to probably be an 8-win ball club and to finish 3rd in the Atlantic Division. Boston College last year, it was bad. Only 4 victories in all of 2011. That's 8 losses. And entering this year, you're without your best player that you've had for the past 2 years. Luke Keeley, their middle linebacker, 2-time All-American, moved on to the NFL. You knew he would. First-round overall draft pick by the Carolina Panthers. The linebacking core will still be good for Boston College, don't get me wrong, with Steve DeVito, who now becomes the leader of that linebacking core and that defense, in my opinion, for that matter, along with fellow linebacker Kevin Pierre-Louis. And it helps to have defensive tackle Caleb Ramsey return too. Boston College, when you take a look at it, defensively, they're nothing really wow, but at least in the linebacking core and some of their defensive linemen, they're good. The biggest problem with Boston College is their offense, which last year was dismal, especially at quarterback play. Now, their quarterback does return in the form of Chase Redding, but Redding over the last 2 years has not put up tremendous numbers, so the pressure is really going to be on him. Even more pressure is the fact that Montel Harris, their star running back, was kicked off the team a couple of months ago for multiple team violations, so Boston College has to move on now without him as well. Up front for Boston College, Emmett Cleary has a shot at being all ACC from his tackle position, and tight end Chris Pantel, he's back too, and he can play. But Boston College, even if the offense can show improvement, you have a feeling it's still going to be a rough year for them. Talent-wise, they're just not up there with the Clemsons and the Florida States of the division. And the schedule, probably the toughest you're going to find in the ACC. Opening the year against Miami, very first game, you play against the Hurricanes to start your 2012 campaign. Plus a road game against Northwestern, in which BC will be an underdog in. And then at Florida State, at Georgia Tech, back-to-back weeks in October. And you close out the year with Notre Dame, Virginia Tech, and you're playing at NC State. So for Boston College, victories are going to be very few and far between, and I think that schedule is going to prevent them from getting out of the cellar in the Atlantic. A lot of people around College Park were not happy that Ralph Friedgen, after the 2010 season, was let go, making way for the former UConn coach Randy Edsall. And I'm sure after last season, Edsall did not exactly win a lot of the Maryland fan base over with that 2-10 record. Just a bad year on both sides of the ball. Offensively, they'll look different. They'll go from the spread to a pro-style type offense with their QB, C.J. Brownback. Not a terrific thrower, but he is pretty mobile, so he has at least that element going for him. And we'll also see wide receiver Kevin Dorsey return, maybe their more talented, most talented offensive player for the Terps. But we'll see how this backfield does for Maryland. They've got several guys who can step in there, but not really one standout guy per se. Defensively, I don't think Maryland's that bad. Most of their front seven will return, but I have a feeling that if Maryland's going to get to 6 wins in the bowl, their defense is going to have to virtually pitch shutouts because I think their offense is going to struggle this year. Defensively, there's enough talent back to where these guys could get some kind of all-ACC honors, first team, second team, or honorable mention. The safeties are both really good. Matt Robinson and Eric Franklin are back, and also, too, the linebackers, Kenny Tate, and maybe the best linebacker, Demetrius Hartsfield, returns, along with defensive end Joe Volano, who's probably going to be the anchor of that Terrapin D. Maryland's schedule, I have mixed reviews on it. September, they play at West Virginia. That's a loss. And then they end the year with a difficult 3-game stretch, and that includes Georgia Tech and Clemson both on the road. And then guess what? The week after, you have a home game, but it's against Florida State. Maryland's not going to finish last in this league, even though I know they finished 2-10 a year ago. I think with the new coordinators, maybe that will spell new attitude for Randy Edsall's squad. I think it's going to be a struggle for Maryland because of that tail end of that schedule, plus they're learning new tendencies from the coordinators. But at least the attitude, I think, will be better because of the coaching changes. And I think Maryland could end up winning, maybe 5 games this year. And I think they'll flirt, but probably just fall short of getting to bowl eligibility and that necessary 6-win total. Well, for Wake Forest, they went to a bowl. Just barely. After starting 5-2 in 2011, the Demon Deacons kind of ended 2011 on a downer, losing 5 of their last 6 games, including getting blown out by Vanderbilt in the regular season finale and losing their bowl game to Mississippi State. But still, for Wake Forest, they got to a bowl, and that was the most important thing. Biggest reason is because you get those 15 additional practices in December, and when you are a young and up-and-coming team, 15 additional practices help immensely. So for Wake Forest, another year behind center will be quarterback Tanner Price, who started 9 games in 2010. And last season, you can say pretty much had a breakout year. Threw for over 3,000 yards and earned all ACC honors. The guy can play. And surrounding him will be running back Joshua Harris, as well as their wide receiver, that's Michael Campanaro. So we will see if this time Wake Forest doesn't fall into that trap of finishing with a thud after starting like studs. That will be the big thing for Wake Forest, so you wonder if endurance will play a role into that as well. Now, the offensive line, they have to replace 4 starters. That's right, they only have 1 back. So the experienced players are there for Wake Forest, but the interior will definitely have some holes to fill. Defensively for Wake Forest, there's going to be some work there to be done too. Last year, one of the biggest reasons why the Demon Deacons finished the season on a downer was because they couldn't get to the quarterback. They only had 11 sacks in the 13 games they played a year ago. So QB pressure, hopefully that's an emphasis if you're a Wake Forest fan that they will place upon in August practices. And if so, then Wake Forest should be just fine for the season. Returning at nose guard will be Nikita Whitlock, who could be all ACC this year, along with cornerback Merrill Noel. For Wake Forest, their schedule, they get Florida State early on in a September 15th showdown, and also the middle part of the schedule doesn't look quite that difficult. The ending of the schedule, though, November, it could be pretty much a bumpy ride. Playing Clemson at North Carolina State, at Notre Dame, and the return game against Vanderbilt, that November slate does look like it's going to give Wake Forest some problems. Wake Forest, though, because Tanner Price is coming back, I think that in itself is going to lead to some victories for Wake Forest. Will it lead to a necessary 6-win total? I think it will. Will it lead to any more than that? They're going to have to surprise some teams in order to make that happen. I foresee it being about the same year for Wake this year as last year, around that 500 mark, but I think they'll have just enough to go to a bowl game, and I think they're going to finish 4th in the Atlantic Division. The biggest problem that Florida State had last year was staying healthy. After the Oklahoma loss, in which at that time the Sooners were #1 back in early September of a season ago, Florida State was banged up, not only as far as the linemen, and it definitely showed as far as the skilled players, including E.J. Manuel, who couldn't even play against Clemson the following week, and Florida State missed him because Clemson won that game by less than a touchdown, and Florida State couldn't get off the schneid the week after Clemson by losing to Wake Forest. That's right, Florida State lost 3 games in a row in that September stretch, and they ended up also losing later in the year unexplainably at home to Virginia. So Florida State had a disappointing season by their standards, and pretty much by the standards of anybody who really follows college football. They finished 9-4, and they hope this year to not only correct those problems from the year ago, but also to stay healthy at the same time. Seminoles returned 9 starters on offense and 8 on defense, and that includes the quarterback, E.J. Manuel. One heck of an athlete, quick, fast, has an arm. Of course, he needs to improve a little bit on his accuracy, but overall, he's one of their better players. He returns, and running back-wise, they don't really have one player that sticks out, but they have several players. I think they're probably going to use as many as 4 running backs this year, but they all have the capability of making things happen. The receiving core loses Burt Reed, but they do return 2 other notable receivers, including Rodney Smith as well as Rashad Green. Offensive line, I think, is going to be the major emphasis for Florida State. Last season, the Seminoles averaged just barely over 3 yards per carry. So the offensive line has to get a little more aggressive. And, of course, the big thing for them is being able to stay healthy. That's going to be the key because they really showed their lack of depth up front during that losing skid last season. Defensively, as we mentioned, 8 starters are back. Probably the best defensive line in all of college football. I dare you to tell me another defensive line that's going to equal what Florida State has coming back, including some All-American caliber players in Brandon Jenkins as well as Bjorn Warner, 2 studs up front for the Seminoles. Secondary, pretty talented as well, although at times they did have some lapses, including the strong safety, LaMarcus Joyner, and their outstanding corners in Greg Reed as well as Xavier Rhodes. Florida State last season, when you look at their losses, what led to some of those losses besides the fact that they were banged up? I think the biggest thing was they gave up too many big plays. That was evident against Oklahoma, and then also especially against Clemson and against Wake Forest. So Defensively, they have to avoid having those coverage breakdowns. If you look at Florida State's schedule, there's no Oklahoma on it this year. Their toughest game out of league will be against Florida, but that's not until the end of the year, and that's at home, and Florida State will be favored to win that ball game. Game of the years right now look to me like the matchup in September, late September at home against Clemson, in a game that will decide the Atlantic Division, and Florida State will be expected to win that one, plus another game too, November the 8th at Blacksburg against Virginia Tech, and what could be the first of two meetings between those two teams. The other one possibly the ACC championship game. Two other games for Florida State that they can't rest on either. The one at South Florida, that is the week after the Clemson game, and October 6th at North Carolina State, and that's the week after South Florida. So Florida State's got a couple of games that could sneak up on them if they don't watch out. And they have two other games, the Clemson and the Virginia Tech games, that'll be toughies. But overall, Florida State, with the experience they have coming back and all the talent that they have, to me, they are the favorites to win the Atlantic. And again, the health of that team and also the development of the offensive line will be key if Florida State can be a national contender. I think they're probably going to go 11-1 this season. And I think for Jimbo Fisher, this will be his best year there at FSU. And I look for Florida State to play for the ACC championship game. That's my look at the ACC. As far as the Atlantic Division, my next preview will talk about Virginia Tech, Miami, and the rest of the Coastal Division of the ACC. Catch you next time.